Thousands of people came to the Place de la République in Paris to show their solidarity with slain teacher Samuel Paty. It was here where large groups also gathered following the 2015 Charlie Hebdo attacks. But today people wore signs saying Je suis enseignant, or I am a teacher. Many came here to grieve, but also to protest. They felt compelled to speak out in support of the teacher and freedom of speech. We're here to defend the Republic, liberty, equality, fraternity, and secularism. But it was not just in Paris. Communities came together across the country to remember the 47-year-old teacher. Secularism must be the unshakable foundation of our society, for that is what allows us to live together. We will not allow it to be attacked. We will continue our work when the school year and classes resume. We will return to teach without fear, because it is not students who committed this crime. It was a young person who obviously was not a student and failed to understand anything. Paty was on his way home from school when he was attacked. Shortly after, police surrounded the suspect and ordered him to drop his weapon. Authorities say they opened fire on the suspect after he attacked police. France is set to hold further national tributes for the victim in the coming days.
For more on this, let's bring in DW's Religious Affairs correspondent, Martin Gack. Martin, this all goes back to a classroom conversation about the freedom of expression. Just how difficult is freedom of expression in a multicultural society?
I think that episodes like this one show you that, to some degree, multiculturalism and integration are really the key words. And as a matter of fact, part of the problem that you have is that, to some degree, the form of multiculturalism that much of Europe has been seeing evolved is essentially incompatible to the forms of republicanism and freedom of expression that we had become accustomed to, particularly in the context of French secularism and French freedom of expression. So, this kind of episode is the one that really shows you that there is a form of democratic understanding that we have developed from the sense that we need to deal with things that offend us. And we have communities, which are not just Muslim, but Jewish, Christian communities, religious communities, and otherwise, that really take offense to be a very limit of political and public participation. And this is a territory that is extremely difficult to negotiate.
I mean, France is officially a secular country. How does that factor into the public discussion surrounding this particular incident?
Look, the idea of laïcité, the form of secularism, and it's not a perfect translation, really, but the idea of laïcité for the French has a lot to do with protecting the state from religious influence. I mean, when we think of secularism in the US, what we think of is, the state essentially protecting religion from essentially the force of politics. This is somewhat inverted. So one of the things that we're just hearing in the report, and I think that are actually very important, and we're going to continue hearing as we go along, is that there has to be a defense of the basis of secularism through the country, precisely because this is the type of politics of violence that, we have seen in religion through history, and the state is in charge of trying to stop.
So French President Emmanuel Macron is preparing new legislation on integration. Does this incident, this murder, does it point to the limits of integration then?
Look, there is something very particular about this episode, and that is that despite what most are saying, this not necessarily come out of essentially a terrorist organization. This actually began with the parents at the school that were sending messages and build essentially networks of conversation through Facebook and Twitter and so on, asking for something to be done. Now, what this something was supposed to be was not clear, but this is not something that came from an organization. This is something that came to some degree from the community. So I think that although Macron's position had an immediate backlash in terms of expressing the necessity of integrating the Muslim community into essentially, I mean, this part of the Muslim community into the body politics of the French system, I think that this is the kind of episode that will actually essentially push the conversation forth. One of the political dangers is that this will be actually taken advantage of by very reactionary forces that have had a very strong Islamophobic essentially thrust for the last 2, 3 or 4 years.
All right, DW's religious affairs correspondent Martin Gack, thank you.
You're welcome.